The lectionary has been traveling us through Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount, and the theme of love is very strong in that section of Scripture. I'm not going to start by having a reading, but I am going to make a reference to the theme of love, since this Tuesday is Valentine's Day, of all things. You might be forgiven for posing the question, in the immortal words of Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it? And the entire subject of love, which sort of jumps out at us from Matthew 5, 6, and 7, can be a little confusing in the English language. By that I mean the word love for us is a very broad term. You can love ice cream, you can love your mom and dad, you can love your wife, you can love your cat. These things are, a little difficult. Other languages have far more words for the emotion or the feeling or the concept that we're trying to express. To show you how generic it can be, I remember some years ago when I was becoming more familiar with texting and so forth, it'd be about 12 years ago, I was dealing with a fellow by the name of Trent, and a nice guy and all, a little bit of a stutter. He is a very pleasant personality, and he was a cabinet maker. Still is, actually. I talked to him the other day. But he texted me something one day, and he finished with LOL. And I thought, well, that's weird, but I guess he's just being friendly. But why would he finish his text, or it may have been a text or an email, with lots of love? And I'm thinking about this, and it was several days before I realized that's not lots of love, it's laughing out loud. Oh, but that's, it's such a generic term that's the way I took it. And maybe you're very familiar with acronyms and things like that. I remember a few years later I got LMAO. I figured that one out after a while. It's similar to LOL, but slightly different. But either way, the concept of love is vague and it's fuzzy. Now, when it comes here to Tuesday the 14th, what is called traditionally Valentine's Day in North America, 200 million cards will be sent back and forth across Canada and the U.S., and no married man dare forget to be in tune with that. Right, Al? It's your first year? Yeah, okay. Just checking. But the point is, it is a very human emotion that is remembered on that day. And you might say, well, it's a Hallmark day. Correct. It actually came about many years ago in the 3rd century, I think it was. There was a bishop by the name of Valentine, and the Emperor Claudius II, I think his name was. But anyway, he didn't want young men getting married. He wanted them to go into the army, and he figured you were more focused as a single man. You could go to war, you could support the legion, this sort of thing. And Valentine, who was a bishop or a minister or something like that, he performed weddings in secret. And for that, eventually, he was executed for going against the emperor's decree. So he goes into folklore, and Christians kind of remember him as a really cool guy and somebody who suffered a little bit for the cause of love. And then, of course, every culture has some sort of pagan overtone. You see the little baby with the arrow, that was a celebration. Yeah, there the little stinker is. That was a celebration of the Greek and the Roman god of love, who would ping people with the little arrow through the heart, this sort of thing. And again, this is a bit of a rip-off in other cultures. We find in the Psalms, for example, that God pierces his enemies with his arrows, things like that, and causes a change of heart, things like that. So you have all sorts of legends and things. And in the Christian church, they decided, well, we'll overcome some of these things by having a celebration of just physical attraction, physical love, the sort of thing that bonds people together. And that's not a bad thing because God himself is love. And love, there are different words, we'll get to that in a minute, for the concept of love in other languages. But it's certainly true in the Old Testament and throughout the New that when describing the love that God has for humanity, that God has for us, he uses warm, fuzzy, romantic concepts to describe that. Throughout the Old Testament, the Old Covenant is described as a marriage covenant. And you get to the New Testament, you find the New Covenant initiated at the Last Supper is perhaps shocking to the disciples at that time. The overtones of a marital covenant is obvious. The offering of the cup was directly out of the marriage proposal of a typical Jewish wedding at that time. And then all the discussion of, I go away to prepare a place and I will return to you, is all language predicated on the idea that the groom, after proposing to his fiancée and after her taking the cup, says, okay, now we're legally betrothed, we're legally married, but now I got to go build a few rooms for us to live in. I go to my father's house and I got to make additional rooms so that you and I can live together in my father's house. You read that, and we read it typically at Passover, Easter season. And so this is a very, very strong motif, both in the Old Testament and the New. You find when the prophets speak about the love that God has for Israel, especially in Ezekiel, he will talk about the fact that I came along and you were an abandoned baby girl, and I rescued you. And I caused you to grow up, and I caused you to become beautiful. I gave you garments and all of these other things, and earrings and so forth, it described. And then it was a time for you to be engaged, to be married. And he said, I put my tent over you. Again, a Jewish motif. I gave you safety and I gave you protection. And all of these things which speak to the warm, fuzzy, kissy type of love that we're familiar with and Hallmark will be promoting on Tuesday, is very much out of God's mind and heart. You read in Genesis 5, this is the account of Adam's family line. When God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them, and he named them mankind when they were created. So in creating male and female, God was reflecting the unity that he has within the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. He was creating something which could cause us to understand that we're not complete of ourselves. Many years ago, I was reading a piece on the physiology of the brain, and as we developed in the womb, first of all, we developed, as our brain developed, believe it or not, we all developed as female. I found that rather shocking. And then, if one side of the brain shrinks, you become male, literally. So, as a fetus, we began with a complete brain, and if part of the brain shrinks, so we only have 3/4 of a brain, we're male. That's physiologically how it works. It's a little bit demeaning to think about that, but that's the way it works. This is the way that biologically we develop. And so we become attracted to each other. We are drawn to each other. And in marriage, which is not necessary to have a fulfilled and complete life, obviously, Jesus himself wasn't married. Paul wasn't married, although he had, many people will say, maybe been difficult to live with. But here's the point. In finding male and female, bringing them together, you read the story about Adam, the other creation story, and he sort of says, well, there's a male and female giraffe, there's a male and female bunny rabbit. Where's my counterpart? And God says, well, take a nap, I'll create something for you. And the story is, here he presents Eve, and this is a creation story, okay? Genesis 5 is a different story, but the same thing. But here comes Eve, and basically you have Adam saying, wow, this is better than a giraffe. This is better. And although the rabbis, as they used to discuss what it meant that God made male and female, and of course they would always focus on the theology of the Sabbath, and the great debate among the rabbis was, is it permissible to make love to your wife on the Sabbath? Because it's work? Yeah, we shouldn't do that. Well, we should do that. Well, we shouldn't do that. And finally one wise rabbi said, well, when did God make Adam? Friday morning. When did God make Eve? Friday afternoon. What do you think they did Friday night as the Sabbath came on? Oh, okay. It's okay to make love to your wife on the Sabbath. End of discussion. And so all the rabbis, you see, decided that must be okay because that was the pattern of creation. But the point was the pattern of creation said that you of yourself must recognize that you are not complete. And so, as we sometimes say, if it were not for warm, fuzzy romantic attraction, men would be found constantly on the couch with the remote control, and they never get up. They never have any energy. But fortunately, God made this. I think I get a little cartoon there of the way God, created humanity to be attracted to each other, and also to understand the need for each other. Yesterday I needed to make a decision about something. You may say, well, it's trivial. You needed to choose a color. You needed to choose a shape. You needed to make a commitment to get something built for your kitchen. Well, why couldn't you just say what you wanted? Because I didn't know what I wanted until somebody else helped me decide what I wanted. And this, of course, is a reflection of we seek harmony and unity with someone else, and after discussion, we come to a full understanding of a topic, which is why occasionally when there's frustrations or problems, difficulties, my wife will seek me out and say, I need to talk about this. And when I have certain burdens or problems, I will seek her out. And as the expression is, a burden shared is a burden halved. And so there is a type of love that, as I said, begins with the reality that we're not complete in and of ourselves. Even single men will talk to their mother, so we'll talk to their sister, we'll have friends who will help them sort of form and complete their thoughts, because we are created that way. None of us is complete in and by and of ourselves. And so this warm, fuzzy thing that happens on Tuesday where people put their money into cards and other thoughts helps. Dear old Valentine, as I said, was a bit of a rebel. And so when the Roman emperor said, hey, I want all my soldiers single, he broke the law. And for that, he became a bit of a hero to Christians. And that came along. However, as I began with the idea that love is a vague concept, within the Greek language, there are actually numerous words for love. And the three most common ones that get discussed are these. Eros, taken from the name of the god of love, Eros. And we take words from that like erotic and words like that. But Eros is the type of love that God uses to describe his affection for his wife, Israel. It's the type of concept and idea that he built into us that is the rather, and you might say rather shallow concept, but it's still a very strong concept. I know I had a professor once who tried to, and he was Greek, and obviously he spoke Greek and he spoke New Testament Greek, and he very sternly said, well, this word has nothing to do with love. And well, maybe you want to argue that in the terms of semantics, but in the real world in which human beings live, it has a bearing on love. As I said, if it weren't for Eros, then all men would be found flopped on the couch with a remote control watching. I believe there's an Oilers game on right now. And fortunately you have other things on your mind, so you came to church. Now, when you understand that this is a creation of God, and that even in the scriptures you will find, let's say, the book of the Song of Solomon, which is a beautiful poem in which actually a young woman talks about the joy she has in seeing the young man in her life come towards her, and a celebration of attraction and affection and all these things. You realize, hey, this is a creation of God, for God, and it helps us to understand the relationship that exists within the Godhead. The other word that commonly is used is philia, and this is the concept of brotherly love. This finds its way to our language, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. And this could be used, and there are other specific words that will be related to this that speak of family love, the affection you have for your brother and your sister, your mother, your father, the cousins, and so forth. This is also an aspect of love that, unfortunately, as I said, we have one word, and so it loses its meaning for us, and it's at times frustrating. But philia is a powerful concept as well. And we have, I have friends who have passed, and I miss them. I have family that's passed, and I miss them, and I feel, and occasionally perhaps a memory will come to mind, or I'll see something in a movie that reminds me of these people, and it'll bring a tear to my eye. It'll bring a thought to my mind. It has nothing to do with eros, but it's a powerful motion also. Jesus, when he was trying to invoke the relationship between himself and the disciples, did what? He said, you've moved beyond discipleship to friendship. We are friends. That's another way that he expresses his love towards us. And then, of course, the third word that is used, especially in relationship to God, who is love, is agape. And agape is profound, it's broad, it's deep. There's nothing vague about that. And this is the appeal that Paul makes when he speaks in 1 Corinthians 13. And I won't excavate the entire chapter, but you know it almost off by heart, where he will reference, if I can speak with the tongues of men or of angels, meaning either extravagantly. He didn't mean that he knew the language that angels used, or that angels even have language. Maybe they communicate telepathically. But he's saying, I could be the most gifted linguist in the world, but do not have love, do not have agape. I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. We respect prophecy. We like people who have knowledge and all of these things. And faith, he said, this is incredible. Faith to move mountains. But if I do not have love, I am nothing. And then where the rubber hits the road, there's no fuzziness about this. Love is patient. That's difficult. Love is kind. That's demanding. It does not envy. Are you kidding me? When we think of ourselves, the first thing we do is compare ourselves to somebody else, which is coveting, which is envying, which is demeaning to us. It diminishes us. It takes away the feeling of celebration that we might have. I look in the mirror and I say, well, I'm looking okay today, but I don't have hair. Al has hair. Oh, I feel bummed out. I wish I was Al. Al can still grow hair on his head. I bet Al can't grow hair on his, never mind, I can, from the neck down, I am, hirsute. From the neck up, I can't grow a mustache. See, and in comparison with someone, it just robs me. It strips me of dignity and a sense of worth. Why? Because I'm comparing, as Paul says, Corinthians, they that measure themselves against others, compare themselves among themselves. You say, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't be doing that. So real profound, the love of God that settles into our minds and our hearts and our souls, it doesn't envy. Neither does it boast. No, either extreme. It is not proud. It doesn't dishonor others. It doesn't have to put anyone else down to just feel complete in a relationship with God and fellow man. It's not self-seeking. I need this, I want this, I want this, I need this. Give me that thing. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It doesn't flash and flare and just respond emotionally. It's not a reactor. It keeps no record of wrongs. Boy, how you just remember what you did yesterday. You see, love isn't warm and fuzzy. It's very practical. It's very solid. It's very hard. It's very demanding because it's of God. This is the type of love that flows from God. I remember years and years ago, I went on a visit with George Patrickson and visited a lady, and we went in and sat down, and George said, "So what did you want to talk about?" She said, "I just need to tell you, my husband doesn't love me." And then she began to describe her feelings that came out of her emotions, feelings that said, "I am unloved." After a while, George said, "Well, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're describing. I hear what you're feeling." And he said, "I came in to your yard and we walked past a camper. And you enjoy camping?" Yeah, we have a nice camper." And he said, "I imagine your husband worked kind of hard to afford that." "Well, yeah, he did. And we enjoy it." And he said, "You have quite a nice home." In fact, it was better than any home I'd lived in or any home that George lived in ever. And he said, "Well, he seems to want to provide for you and the children." "Well, yeah, he's good that way." And he began to talk about the many aspects of her life. And he said, "Look," I said, "I know what you're saying. I know how you feel, but look at how and then he began to try to describe the lengths to which this man went to provide for his family. And okay, he wasn't the most balanced, perfect individual in the world, but there was a depth and a breadth to him as a human being, which he drew from in his Christian walk and his Christian conviction. And she had looked at the relationship that somebody else had that she thought was warmer and fuzzier with this lady had with her husband, and she idealized him. And, it got really complicated. And he tried very gently but very clearly, and I was profoundly affected by that particular discussion. And I never, ever forgot that particular visit. It was 43, 44 years ago. And the value that George was able to communicate to that person that her husband had. He was a solid, stable, dependable, reliable person that at any time she could say, "Oops, this isn't working," and she could lean on him. At any given time that she had a real physical need, let's say, he would step up and provide. He was a good dad in many ways. And yet, emotionally, we think that this is the dominant thing, because all relationships begin with that. It all begins with this arrow of attraction, affection, and that's not a bad thing, but it's not everything. It's just something that gets you sitting upright and said, "Okay, maybe I don't have to watch TV or play on my phone. Maybe I can take an interest in another human being," this idea. I said we were in Matthew. And in Matthew, I'm not going to go through this section, but there's one little thing that I wanted to reference, because Jesus talks about the value of human beings in this section. He talks about not using human beings for gratification or abusing them. And so I was taken back to Matthew in this case, and his words. He said, "You've heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, or anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' I'll tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. That's interesting and worth excavating, because what Jesus is saying is there is no human being to whom you could say, Raka, or you're useless. Now, that's very challenging. In other words, God is saying every human being has worth. Every human being has worth. Have you ever had that feeling, or you've heard those words, or maybe even wanted to say of another person, you're a waste of skin? Horrible thing to say, but it's said quite often. Here, he is saying that this is a very human reaction to reject other people, to put them down. You're a waste of space. Your existence is vain and empty. This is what he's bringing up, this Aramaic word, raka. And in the place of the day, if you were a criminal, then you could be executed. The Romans would behead, the Jews would stone. And after, in a Jewish context, you were executed by stoning, you ended up in Gehenna, which was the garbage pile, which is exactly what he says. And he says, anyone who says you fool is in danger of Gehenna, the fires of hell. Gehenna was the garbage dump, and the fires always were smoldering there because garbage was always dumped. And yet human beings would do that. Human beings will think that way. I caught a little glimpse of a reality show a couple of years ago now. And it was one of these, and there are a lot of wasteful reality shows. I'm not recommending any of them. Housewives of here, housewives of there, the Bachelor, the Bachelorette, on and on they go. This was young people in therapy, all right? But one thing I caught, as I was flipping through the channels, this one young man, his dad's a very famous entertainer and singer. And it's apparently, he said to his kid, because he came from a hard scrabble background himself, I won't say who he was, but his kid is there complaining that his dad had said to him once, and it just stuck with him, you're just a waste of egg and sperm. And of course, now he's in therapy and he's working through this. Now, of course, you have to understand, he probably grew up a privileged life. He's probably blown a lot of money on chemicals that he sniffed or snorted or did other things with. And his dad probably said that in a moment of frustration. I grew up in poverty in the United Kingdom, and I found my way, and I struggled, and I accomplished, and I did this, and I did that. And, you were born into privilege, and you've just piddled away your life as far as I'm concerned. So it was a horrible thing to say. And I'm sure he got paid for being in a reality show and being in therapy. But it still was a dramatic illustration of Raka, you worthless waste of space. He may have been wasting his space. He may have been leading a useless life. That's God's judgment on him. He has to sort of work through that, and he has to come to that particular place. And so the responsibility that God gives us, as he gives us his love, is to refrain from, is to understand that he loves what we might consider a worthless, useless person more, just as much as he loves us. And we're worth something, we know. Because we look in the mirror and we see ourselves. We say, I'm worth something. I had an aunt, she died here a little while ago, and she could never have children. But she and her husband tried in midlife to adopt. They were unable, and they fostered a child. And so I had a cousin by the name of Faye. And Faye came to them as about 5 years old. And by then, the damage was done. She was lucky to have my aunt and my uncle to care for her. But she had bounced through half a dozen foster homes and had never, ever, as a baby or as a youngster, being accepted or nurtured. And she's a pretty little 5-year-old blonde. She grew up to become a teenager. By then I was in Canada, but she had a really difficult life, and she made it difficult for herself in so many ways. I saw her a few times when I'd go back to England, and she was lucky enough to have a really decent guy in her life, and she had one child, but she was in so many ways emotionally hurt and damaged. And unfortunately for my aunt, I suppose, she died a couple of years actually before my aunt died. But Faye, she was quite often alienated from people, and she would even though she had a child, she never treated my aunt as the grandmother. And of course, so my nieces and nephews, my children, were my aunt's grandchildren. And it was one day she went home, and I guess my aunt had said to her, she said, we just don't have a relationship. We just don't have what I always longed for, which is to have a daughter. And Faye's comment was very telling. She said, "Yeah, don't worry, Mom." She said, I'm that way with everyone. I'm that way with everyone. And I thought it was so sad, because in the very earliest years of her life, she never had a mother's love. And by the time she came to, into my aunt's life, it was too late. And I could speak of the experience one of my friends had bringing orphaned children in from Eastern European area and bringing them to Canada. And some were very, very blessed and flourished. But he, in his own experience, has two very troubled sons as a result of their the emptiness in their lives for the first couple of years. And that's a very well-documented study. The most important love, they say, for a child in the first couple of years is mom. And to not have that is just a profound gap that sometimes for some human beings could never, ever, ever be filled. I know that was the case in my cousin's life. And so the paucity, the gap that we create when we look, even at those who are we sometimes talk about the homeless, those who are just, in our opinion, because they are wasting their time, wasting their energy, misdirecting their lives. Jesus still said, hey, you're not the judge of that. He said, you cannot afford ever to say to one of my children, one of my creation, Raka, he said, and you can't even look at them and say foolish. I'll tell them about their folly. I'll tell them about their foolishness. Their conduct will correct them in some way or another, and I will work this out. But he said, it's not up to you. In fact, he goes on to say of the profound nature of his love, if you're alienated and you have trouble and difficulty with your brother or sister, he said, listen, leave your gift at the altar. Go out, be reconciled to them, and then come back, and then we'll talk. Now, don't take that too literally. It doesn't mean to say if you have trouble with your brother or sister, you can't talk to God, but he's using this dramatic illustration of how important it was. Back in Corinthians, Paul surprisingly says this, when he said, when I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. I thought of that again many years ago. I was listening to one of our pastors actually preach. This is decades ago. But he'd grown up in Australia. His dad was a successful lawyer. And of course, he became enamored. He left the family, and he went off to Ambassador to study the Bible. And he looked back and he thought of his dad as, that's not that great. And gradually, as he grew up and he grew older and he became a parent himself, and he put it this way, he said, I look back, and he said, my father, who I thought of as, in terms of his legal profession, and he had all this emotional baggage towards his dad. He said, I reflected on the fact that he used to take us on picnics, outside of Melbourne where he grew up. He said he used to do, and then he began to list the things, and maybe they were mundane, maybe they were practical, maybe they were physical, but he began to think in a more mature way and see the value that his father had given him in his childhood as he grew up. And he was a smart man. When he transitioned from ministry in the Worldwide Church of God, he went and got his doctorate. And he became a family therapist. Many years later, I saw him at a funeral. I flew to Vancouver for a funeral, and he showed up there. And he had been friends with the lady who died, and actually he was classmates with Frank Brown, the widower. And he talked openly about how he had matured and changed in himself, and how he brought that to his family therapy and his marital counseling work as a therapist. We had that and a long conversation about Martin Knopfler's music and his first solo album, Golden Heart. So we had a real good conversation, that included. But I never forgot him discussing his relationship with his father, and it took maturity to understand the depth and the breadth of the way his father expressed his love and how he had empowered him so that he could leave Australia, go to England, go to school, and even supported him. And yet his emotional resentments and his illogical responses to so many things. True godly love requires maturity, depth, the capacity to step back a little bit and think, to look around 360, to count with gratitude the gifts that are coming your way, and to realize with God's eye what it really means to understand love. It's warm, it's fuzzy, it's fantastic, and happy Valentine's Day. And in case you forgot, Al, it's Tuesday, just in case, because young men who get married need to be reminded of these things. But in the final analysis, godly love, which has flowed from him to us, to me, is broad, is deep, is profound. It can be eros, and should be. It can be philia, and it should be. But in the final analysis, it's a practical, enduring, rock-solid agape, which thankfully is the nature of our God in heaven, who loved us before we ever understood that we might want to love him, who extended to us grace and acceptance and purpose on principle, long before we ever realized how wonderful and how valuable that is. And he asks of us, hey, do not diminish the rest of my creation. Think in terms of me, the God of love, being the one who eventually will sort all these things out. In the meantime, commit yourself to trying to be gracious to the rest of humanity and open your heart and your mind to show empathy, sympathy, and understanding of the struggles that your cousin may be going through as a result of damage, setback, and disappointment in life. Try to understand the broken world that you cannot correct, but you are also not given to judge. Just try to understand the depth of my love and understand that you can trust me to work out the details, because I have redeemed all that you see, and I will make sure that nothing is lost or goes to waste. And take some comfort yourself from that. I was thinking of that here the other day. I had a phone call from a lady who just said, would it be possible to rent your church? Kind of awkward, because we rent the church too. And then she said there was a death. She said it was my child. And of course, it's obvious that she came from a little bit of an awkward background. I said, well, okay, tell me the story. I'll see if I can be helpful. She said, well, I had to offer my child up for adoption. when she was born. So she went to a family, and she said the family raised her, which is kind of nice. But when she was 16, they brought her back, and they just literally dumped her at my door. Clearly, she's a troubled child. And she said the last few years have been difficult, and she just died. I didn't ask directly, but I got the idea that at the age of 20 or 21, she just died of a drug overdose. She said there was a kind of memorial that their family had for her, and they had her cremated before I knew she would pass. But she said, would it be possible? Now, I clarified with her, and actually I did commit to helping. But I just got a text this morning, and she said, okay, we're not going to do this. Okay. But it was a very sad story. I thought, what a testimony. I thought at the time I could be of some support and help. I think the lady lives like 2 blocks over from here. But here you're talking about a kid who has just lost a life that's gone, lost. Nothing can be accomplished now. And I thought, well, the one message I can share with her, and which I did, is there is, fortunately, a Savior who loved the kid more than the birth mother was able to love her. The adoptive mother was able to love her, and certainly the environment she was in, the friends she had, they didn't love her at all. They just used her, abused her, and now she's gone. But in the love of God, the agape of God, no one is lost, no one is abandoned, nobody's raka, nobody's worthless. And that is the message of the gospel. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we are grateful today as we try to understand Matthew's words, and we relate that a little to what's happening this week, which is kind of nice for many families, for many loved ones, for many couples. It's good to have affection, warmth, and tenderness in our lives because you created us to know those things, to share those things, to appreciate them, and to desire them. But you also created us to have friendship, to have family, and also to know your love. And we ask that that love could be something that we more profoundly appreciate in each other. We see the practical side. We see the stable, firm commitment that you have made to us, and we see it in one another. We also ask for your comfort and strength as we try to share that with the rest of humanity, because there is such an emptiness. There are so many people who have heard the words fool, worthless, waste of skin, waste of space. And we may not be able to correct that in ourselves. Maybe we just show a glimmer of the reality that you have and you will, in your way, correct that for all of humanity, even as you have already in the sacrifice of our Savior Jesus. So we thank you. We thank you for the love that we can share, the friendship that we can share, and we ask for the opportunity to show that wherever possible as you make us the light of the world. We thank you for the understanding you've given us in the Sermon on the Mount, and we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.